Is that Ariel that I just heard? Oh, hey.
It was.
I
Hi.
know your voice.
Yeah. So excited to see you all.
I know.
Same. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get us started and introduce Inner Sense, since many of you are new to us, and introduce Isabel. And I'm keeping an eye on the participants list, but Isabel, if you see that I'm waiting too long, feel free to admit people since I'll be speaking. My name's Kelsey, for those of you that don't know me. I'm one of the co-founders and directors at Inner Sense. And I'm going to tell you all just a little bit about Inner Sense, since, as I mentioned, there's a handful of y'all that are new to us today. Inner Sense Healing Arts Collective's mission is to foster self-reflective practices within disempowered populations in effort to build restored and engaged community. Our vision is to create a horizontal system of support which recognizes the shared responsibility of community in creating a more embodied and peaceful society. We're a collectively founded and operated nonprofit organization, and we've been building community and offering healing arts programming since early 2017. We opened our first space in October of 2018 in Chicago, but as a result of the pandemic, are presently operating fully online. You're not muted. If you don't mind muting yourself, thanks. And when we do reopen a physical space, we are going to maintain full online programming in addition. So it's a really great time right now to get involved with Isha from wherever you are in the world. And on that note, we do have a winter membership special that we just launched today that's available for the next 10 days. So anyone who's not already a member, you can receive 20% off any of our membership tiers for the unlimited memberships for the first 3 months. So for a November, December, and January payment. So check that out on our website. We also have what we call limited memberships that are offered year round for people that attend sparsely but somewhat regularly and want to make a regular contribution. So that starts at $25 a month for up to 2 classes monthly, or $50 a month for up to 4 classes monthly. And if you have any questions about Inner Sense or about memberships, you can reach out to me. The Zoom chat is welcome and open, as is my email, kelsey@ishacollective.org. And with that, I'd like to introduce Isabel. Isabel is one of our regular teachers at Inner Sense, leading the weekly Exploring Tarot class, the Tarot Intensive Series Beginners course, which starts next week. And there's still some space in that, as well as a variety of special workshops. Inspired by folk art, mystical multiculturalism, folklore, and contemporary social art practice, Isabel's work is driven by the desire to instill profound self-trust, intuition, and ancestral connection with each piece, class, and performance she undertakes. Her curiosity with mystical practice and the arts began as a child, growing up as a political refugee in a charismatic church, until the moment of reconnecting with the mystical and orthodox roots of Romania brought her to her art and wellness practice. Surrounded by cultures, religions, and ideas as she traveled east and west as a nomad to honor cultures and the collective consciousness, it is a core part of her work. Through the years and countless mystical experiences through art, social practice, and magic, Isabel has developed her own unique tools to harness the wisdom from those experiences. And just one more reminder before I hand it over to Isabel, I want to remind you all that this workshop will be recorded and shared with everyone who registered, which is those of us here and just a couple additional people who aren't coming live, but we will stop the recording when we get to questions at the end. So I'm going to be using the next few minutes as Isabel gets started to sign you in on MindBody. So just as a reminder, I mentioned this in the email, if your name on Zoom is not recognizable to the one you registered with, just send me a private chat to let me know your name on the registration. Thank you all, and go ahead, Isabel.
Thanks, Kelsey. Hi, everybody, and hi, new people and old people. It's like reunion and big party time with all witchy, magical people, so I'm here for it. And so for today, let me share my screen, and I'll be keeping an eye on the chat as well, since we have a big group today. on expectations, right? Like it's a baby witch class. What's gonna happen? What are we expecting? What are we kind of wanting to come away with? So as I start this little thingy here, want to know in the chat, definitely give me your names, your pronouns in the chat, and what are you expecting from Baby Witch class today? What do you want to come away with? Because I'm going to be talking about a lot of witchy things. It's going to be a witchy 101 really, on various different subjects. But if there's something that you came into class today and you're like, Isabel, I want to know about this specifically, I want to make sure that I get to those missing pieces, that whether you're brand new baby witch and you're like, I want to refine my practice, or you want to add more tools to your toolkit, or you're just like, I am brand new and I just don't want to open up a portal to a demon, you know, like we want to make sure that you're doing things safely at all points during your journey on your spiritual journey. So let's hear. Love it. Love it. I'm seeing that they're coming in. Yes. Oh yeah. Don't want to open up any demon portals in the space and keep you guys protected. So we got here. Yep. So no demon portals. Got it. Excited about the history translating to current practices. Definitely going to be talking about that. Brianna, basic protocols and tools needed to connect deeper to my land, ancestors, and community at large. I love that, definitely. No demon portals, totally about self-empowerment, guidance, and protection. We're going to be talking about protection for sure today. Janine, brand new, want to be in deeper and nurturing communication with my ancestors and with nature. I love this ancestral connection that everyone's wanting to go in. And today is really perfect time. Yesterday and today, really, right? We had Samhain, All Saints Day, Dia de los Muertos, the veil is thin. And ancestors are wanting to connect. They're here to support us. So let's see here. Alexa, walking away with methods for casting spells. Definitely talking about that today. And then Elizabeth, new baby witch, welcome, welcome. Let's see. Yes. Alana, history, larger overview, connecting different practices. Yes, definitely. Hannah, open mind, just want to learn, new area for me, something I always had an interest in. Welcome, Hannah. Bree, like to get to a place where I feel automatically connected to source at all times, or be able to receive messages more directly where I am not second guessing myself. Oh, that self-trust is real, right? Like self-trust, self-empowerment, ancestral connection. I'm hearing it. Julie, brand new baby witch, hoping to jumpstart a spiritual practice using lunar cycle as a framework and calendar. Do apologize for the firefighters in the background. Yes, I love that you brought up lunar cycles and frameworks. That's something that at Inner Sense we're all about and have a lot of resources on with lunar cycles in community and in solitary practice, right? Welcome, Jennifer. Raquel, learn how to strengthen my spiritual practice and open myself to my gifts. Yeah, like getting really clear on what your gifts are, because everyone has them. It's just getting clear on like, ooh, this is the thing that I know I can support myself and my community with. Shannon, intentions of protection, discernment. Ooh, that's a big one. I'm a big fan of discernment and honoring. And then Christine, hi Christine, newish solitary practitioner, excited to learn about other perspectives and ideas. Yeah, add it to the eclectic practice, which will be a word that I think many of you will resonate with as eclectic witches that are using a lot of different themes, ideas, and practices for your own paths. Let's see here, Rachel, curious and wanting to feel lighter. I like that, definitely. Ashley, while I have my own magical spiritual practice, I haven't identified as a witch because of the perceived connotations. Oh, so glad you brought this up. Perceived connotations, we're going to be talking about that in history and how it's like, it's a whole thing. It's a whole thing. Definitely understand that. Curious to see what you, practicing witch, have to share about embodying this identity. definitely. And there's just, right, there's so much even taboo around it. Sharing some personal stories of reactions to even bringing out tarot cards in a very normal situation, like, oh no, the devil, you know, it's the thing. Let's see here, Ray. I feel really open to learning whatever happens here. I'm in a learning space with understanding that I can hold both magic and a faith practice. I'm a baby, which I think I love that, right? And I think I made a post on Instagram of I'm a witch that sometimes goes to church, you know? So like you can have both, and there's going to be a lot when we talk about the history of witches that are gonna be like, oh, okay, to help get you from baby witch to baby witch, or maybe even witch. Then we have Veronica here. I would like to integrate this work in womb healing and ancestral connection. Oh, there's a lot of overlap with this. I definitely think, Veronica, that you'll come away today with some tools with that. And kudos on womb healing is such a it is so real and so needed. So thank you for bringing that up. Marissa, looking for guidance and support with creating and maintaining a ritual. That is real, right? Maintaining the habits is the less sexy way of saying it. It'd be like maintaining ritual and sustaining it. I think that it makes it feel a little bit lighter and more creative, rather than like, okay, what are my healthy habits and things like that. Caris, I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing Caris. She, hers, I know my ancestors were deeply pagan, but feeling very disconnected through the Christianity that instilled that fear, wanting to open space to reconnect and redefine as positive. Yes, and kudos to listening to your ancestors and healing that intergenerational stuff and narratives that appear, right? Because that can be some pretty heavy stuff, but we're all here and we're doing that healing tough work. So kudos on that. Courtney, more ways to connect with the universe and energies. Oh, the ways to connect there's so many. It's like a buffet, and you all today will decide what you want to have in your buffet, in your practice. Let's see here. Courtney, yep, got you, Courtney. Christine also would love to know more about how to deal with the religious guilt, because I was raised to believe witchcraft is evil. Teehee, yes. That is very real and very valid. And I can speak from experience on that as well. I definitely resonate with that. I remember going to church in 3rd grade, because every Wednesday was church in private school, and Pokemon was from the devil, because the copyright on the bottom was called like wizard something, and it's like you have to throw it in the fire. So I'm like, I understand. It is real. And I did not throw away my Pikachu card. I did not, because yeah, Pikachu's the best. So also would love to know, oh yeah, Kayla, all pronouns are fine. Grounding in the history and letting that inform everyday rituals, connections, and anchoring in the everyday rituals. Yeah, I'm feeling very earthy with that one. Anchors, and I also was reading lightness with everything that's happening, and knowing how to come back to yourself. I think that witchcraft, and you can personalize it to your way and see what works with you. And we will be talking about Book of Shadows at the end of class. We'll be kind of creating that together, experimenting and seeing what works for you to bring you to connect with the universe, to connect with your personal energies, to create boundaries and cast circles and spells for yourselves that feel, whether they're comforting or can instill a sense of safety or grounding. We'll be talking all about that today. So with that, thank you all for, now I get a feel of the room of all the baby witches and what they need to feel good on their paths, whether you decide to take on the moniker of baby witch or not. Take what you will, and if something doesn't resonate, just leave it to the side. But if there is something that you're getting a little intuitive nudge on during the class today, I highly recommend having a little notebook with you and just write those things down during class today, and give yourself some space this afternoon, this week, to explore what what might be a fun thing to experiment with to see, is this grounding for me, with the intentions and the questions that you all shared. So let's get started here. Let me get rid of the chat so that's not in the way. Alrighty. So in this workshop, my intention is to help you all learn and connect with the history of witchcraft, alchemy, and the witch as an empowerment symbol, to learn the basics of spell casting, potion mixing, and how to use the energy of the moon and the planets to create rituals for yourself and your community. You'll come away with your own book of shadows that you'll create yourself. You'll come away with your astro rhythm and a personalized spell created with your intention. Along with that, you should have received from Kelsey right before, and I'll make sure at the end of class, I'll post the link in the chat again, an Astro Aura digital portrait that you can use on your social media, Book of Shadows, or for spell casting. And it'll be a little artwork specifically inspired by your astro rhythm, that if there is an intention, if there is something you want to focus on, you can use it along with sigil, along with ritual, along with your yoga practice, whatever it may be, to really anchor it in. I love the word anchor, and a couple of you used it today. I want to make sure that you all come away with something that really does feel anchoring and is outside of yourselves, but it's still very personal. So who am I? Kelsey introduced a little bit about me and my process. I facilitate a coven that has artists from all over. A lot of them are from Chicago though as well. And I consider myself more of an art witch. I definitely use my artistic practice to do ritual, to cast spells, to work on internal shadowy stuff that I need to work with. And I love using art as my magic wand. So I have lots of different brushes and lots of different pens and pencils and be like, okay, this is my tool for right now. I also am the hypnotist at Art of Balance in Chicago. It's a really fantastic community-oriented therapy space. And I'm also the group therapy facilitator in that space as well. So that is a resource if anyone needs any extra mental health support, because I think there's all of you all are doing such deep work. If you're coming to Inner Sense, period, everyone's doing inner work. They're being on top of, their shadows, their intergenerational stuff, that it's really helpful to do it also with a clinician and having that on your support team as well. I also, as Kelsey mentioned, teach tarot every Wednesday night. You're all more than welcome to come in. It's very chill, very relaxed. We have a different discussion based on what the group needs, and we pull cards and mirror to each other what the cards are saying. And also the herbal class and the beginner tarot class at Inner Sense as well. And I really do believe that art ritual is really creatively healing, and using art and self-expression for me as a hypnotist, as a group therapy facilitator, but also as a witch, is really, really helpful for myself and also for a lot of the people that I work with. So a lot of you mentioned like, okay, witches, perceptions, definitions, connotations about witches, right? So I'm going to be using, for right now, that witchery and witchcraft is the practice of magical skills, spells, and abilities. And it's a very broad type of definition for this, but hang on with me for this one. So if we were to look back into history of witches and magic and spell casting, curses, things like that, we can find all the way back to actually the Code of Hammurabi, which was one of the first actual legal documents in the ancient world that actually talked about rituals of how to clear hexes and spells. So this was an illegally binding societal document. So witches have always been a part of humanity and culture and society. And this was specifically in the Code of Hammurabi, somebody that curses you or hexes you, you have to go into the river and bathe 3 times, was the specific ritual that was recommended in Hammurabi's code, which I thought was very interesting. And then we keep going as more into the future here, not too far into the future. We have ancient Egyptian magical high priests, and they were in charge of the living and the dead, and doing spells and casting circle and doing protective things for primarily leaders of the time. So it was primarily people that were in monarchies, that had influence, that they had personal advisors, that these were who the witches were in this way. So they were practicing, again, magical skills, spells, and abilities. We then move into the Abrahamic phase, and these are going to be our Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And I want you to, and if you do your own research on witch history, you will see that this sentence is really kind of the start of when things kind of get bad for witches, but also how important it is the words that we choose to use and how things can sometimes be lost in translation, but also how words, this is what spell work is. It's using your words with intention. It's putting it out there with a very clear, this is what is so, this is what is affirmed, and acting upon that, taking the action forward with it. So in the book of Exodus, which is both in the Bible, but also in the Torah, in Judaism and Christianity, there is a verse that was translated to not suffering a witch to live, which, because things were in Aramaic, things were in different languages of the time, what happens is sometimes things get lost in translation. So spells and words have influence. And this is one thing that I want you all to come away with. The words that you use have power. Just like we do with an Instagram post today, at the time, these were the books and the scrolls that had influence of that time. Reginald Scott, who was a scholar on translation of biblical things, argued that actually the mistranslation of witch was poisoner. So not suffering a poisoner to live, because in the context of this verse in Exodus, they were actually saying, oh, there were people that were mixing herbs and poisoning people and causing harm, right? So they were saying witches then automatically were associated with causing harm, and then the rest is history, right? So we get this from a mistranslation. How crazy is that? And how important it is to use our words wisely and with intent. So this was a very, maybe not so much accidental, which I will get to in the future here, of causing a curse on a lot of witches. So from that though, if we were to look in the other lens of the anthropological perspective of what is a witch, we see the shaman or the healer of the community. Most witches at this time, as we were moving a little bit past ancient Egypt, they were actually folks that were learning about herbs. They were the midwives. They were the people that were doing rites and rituals for different people. So anthropological research, the words that they used were the shaman or the healer of the community. Sometimes they were the wise person in the community, or they were the person that would see visions. They were the wise kind of magic person in that community, in that tribe, in that group. So that was another perspective to look at witches as well. And then we go to pop culture. So we go past all this and we go into the future, we go into now, and we see it just as kind of like a benign, positive paganism, divination, and craft. It's not, we don't have, go bathe yourself in the river 3 times, at least not in most of North America. And we do see people, though, that, as I mentioned, I shared some tarot cards in a place that doesn't normalize tarot cards, and they're like, oh no, the devil. So depending on the context of where you're at, this is primarily from keeping in mind a Western, North American, USA, maybe some of Canada too, but there's also some other folk magic that happens up there, perspective. So keeping that in mind. So with these various kind of definitions, perceptions of witches as they've evolved over time, I would be curious to share in the chat, how would you define a witch? Knowing what I just shared now, and you can share yours in the chat and we'll go through them because there's a lot to say about witches. Oh, great question. Would priests also include women, or was it men? There were, in different groups, different tribes, there were women and men that were both priests. Yeah. For ancient Egypt, though, at that time, it was primarily men. We have Janine, someone who uses intention and ingredients to manifest change. Ooh, I like that. That is good. Brianna, a liberated being with a distinct lifetime focus. Ooh, they're thinking about legacy. I like that. Kelsey, which is a person who recognizes the inherent in consciousness in the universe outside of the human mind and works in flow with it. Yes. Someone who believes in their outward and receptive influence of energy through all things. Ooh, I love these. A person who is connected to source and spirit or spirits, to their own internal knowing, to nature, and natural lunar cycles. Yes. One who is wise, one who works with energy seen and unseen to create their reality. Ooh. Here they come. Okay. Someone who is finely attuned to energies and nature. Someone in tune with the energies and rhythms of life and uses intention to be in alignment. I really like the anthropological view, which is my thought is a person who acts with intention and works with the energies of the universe. Yeah, definitely. I think the anthropological one is the closest, right? It's not necessarily pop culture, but there is this, it's definitely a shift from the ancient cultures and Abrahamic faiths. A bridger, someone who has an understanding of beyond the veil, knows the power of connection, dances between the spirit and material world. I love that. Hannah, someone open to the spiritual and willing to use herbs to help others. I suspect there's green witchery with this. Brianna, I would use the word empath as well. Someone who feels deeply or highly sensitive, who is connected to the energy and spirit of the universe outside of the physical. Yeah, I'm getting a lot of, there's definitely some overlap between intuitives and empaths with a lot of everyone's definitions. Emily, a healer, a seer, a connector. Ooh, connector is a good word. Christine, a witch lives intentionally, is connected to the spirit inherent in all living things, makes love to life through ritual. Ooh, yes. That is a great way, as we were reframing, right? Sustaining our rituals and maintaining our habits. I think the perspective of making love to life through ritual is a valid one to help with that. Alana, a combination of all the things everyone has just said and more. Yes. Well, I love this so much already. Thank you. Oh, you're welcome, Ray. Witches feel like connected, grounded, and intentional person who uses the natural world, herbs, nature, etc., and their own rhythms to create change or care for themselves and others soulfully. Yeah. Yes, yes. Someone whose knowledge and experience centers on interconnectedness. Ooh, that is interesting. Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of the word connection coming up. I wonder if that has to do with the anthropological definition of community, right? Like connecting people. Someone who sees the body and nature as an altar. Ooh, yes, that is good. I'm assuming they embodied slightly different things depending on the group tribe. Yes, but what they have in common is the connection to source, dedication to energy and the rhythms of nature, and harnessing this wisdom on the behalf of their community. Healing, advice, management of this and the next world relationship. Definitely, definitely. So knowing this now with these definitions of witches, does that shift a little bit of your understanding or maybe some of those presuppositions of witches? And when the word witch comes up, right, and you're like, oh, she's a witch. I hope that it does. So let's go on here into that history. So we'll say here, and this is going to be primarily from, again, that Western perspective. And because I only know so much about Eastern and then African and Australian culture. I have a couple resources for those of you that want to dive in deeper into those, but the Western one is the one I'm most familiar with. But if you have questions on those, feel free to put them in the chat and I'll see if I can dig up some resources for you. So let me move this over here. Okay, so boop. So history of witches, this is pre-1484. So those that I mentioned, right, like like ancient world, Abrahamic traditions, and then moving forward from that into more of the anthropological studies. Before 1484, and you'll see why it's important that year, witches were medicine persons, healers, the shamans. They worked as the priests before the Catholic Church took over primarily Western and part of Eastern Europe. They were pagan rooted, so a lot of you mentioned nature, a lot of you mentioned the lunar cycle, what the planets were doing. They had a deep and profound understanding of those things and used plants and herbs as part of their practice. Both women and men had power, and they were surprisingly, before a lot of changes happened, they were both equal in many respects. And if they weren't equal, they were both respected for various different roles that they had. And also, there were queer and non-binary representations within these communities that were primarily pagan at the time. And those people were primarily more shamans. They were in-between worlds, liminal space dwellers that would give wisdom for different tribes and groups. They were the herbalists, and they were the ritual artists. So they would be the ones putting together the bonfires and the rituals and the sacrifices and all the different things that were happening at that time. There was also a lot of talk about hereditary witches. This is something that's come up in a couple of the classes that I've taught, where different people would have different traditions that they would then pass on to their children and their children's children of, this is a ritual that our family did. This is a sigil that our family had, just like the crest or the crown or things like that. But this was more of, this family had this kind of ritual that they kind of led. And that doesn't mean that one person is more magical than the other. They just had different rituals and practices that they passed on to different generations. So for those of you that are worried of like, wait, what if my aunt wasn't actually a witch? You still have magical powers. They just may be different, and it's tuning into those gifts like a couple of you mentioned at the beginning, right? So here we go with our favorite dude. So, and you'll see why. Not really. So, tale of Heinrich Kramer and his higher ups at the time. So this was 1484 and after, were the Pope and the Bishop of Salzburg. So this guy, he was a pretty big leader of the Inquisition. He was a monk at the time. So during the Inquisition, we know that there were a lot of people that basically it was pretty much a genocide. People that did not agree with certain beliefs, different Catholic beliefs, refused to convert, things like that. Heinrich Kramer was one of the leaders that decided, this is somebody that's got to go, these people can stay. And he was very, very ruthless about this. So one of the things that after the big part of the Inquisition was over was he started redirecting his attention to witches. It's like, how can I have more control over the population? Like, oh, the midwives and the healers and the people with herbs, that's more of like the day-to-day conversations that are in people's lives. I wonder if I can talk more about them. But also there's a lot of other stuff. This guy was a pretty big misogynist, if you read his work. So, and it's very interesting that he goes back. He was the one that actually decided that Exodus 22:18, thou shalt not suffer a witch to live. He was the one that decided this is going to be a big part, a big crux to his argument to going out and having trials for witches and kind of cleansing Europe of things that were just not Catholic, that were not Lutheran, that were just not Christian in general under that umbrella. And so he wanted to go and start doing this. So he goes to Innsbruck, Germany, and he's the monk there. And he has these mandatory sermons every Sunday. And everyone in the village, everyone in the town had to attend, right? And it was very normal at that time. Everyone would go to church and do their thing. And there's one woman, though, enter Helena, and she attends one of his sermons. And she was part of, and this is kind of the beginning of things. She goes in and she says that I don't agree with you, and she sees him on the road after church. She's very disruptive during church, and then even after church, she like spits on him on the sidewalk and's like, "Fie on you, bad monk. May the falling evil take you." So she's like, "I'm gonna curse you." But she's not she's not saying, this way. And also, though, she was part of the bourgeoisie. She had the privilege to say that because this guy then is like enraged. How dare this woman say this to me? I know my truths, and I am, my boss is the bishop and the pope and God. How dare she defy me, right? So the other thing that Helena did was she knows that this guy is just like full of it and not okay. She knows the really bad stuff that he did with the Inquisition. And so she disrupted all of the times that she did attend, and she also like played hooky and didn't go to the sermons. And she told all of her friends to do the same. He's like, don't go to this guy. And so she had influence in town, right? And so he decides like, this is not okay. And he has this new law that he wrote, this new, pulpit thing that he has, this new influence and power, his new argument, and he wants to put her on trial for being a witch. So this is the first official documented witch trial that we have. And he puts her on trial. Whoop, here we go. And the locally ordinated bishop, because each kind of county had their own bishop. This guy, he came in, he was a little bit of a higher up. The locally ordinated bishop attended this witch trial. And he was like, this guy's a little bit off his, he's not all the way here. One of the reasons was he kept repetitively asking about her sexual history. He was very kind of almost like sexually engrossed with her, but also he was a monk. So there's a lot of that kind of stuff happening, that dynamic happening. And so he's like, this has nothing to do with her being a witch. I don't understand. And so he's like, hey, I'm going to shut this operation down before it gets worse. And so she luckily was acquitted, and she was part of the bourgeoisie. So she had a lot of influence. A lot of people in town knew her, and they're like, oh, what's up with this guy? So we start getting the chatter happening. So she was acquitted. And so Heinrich decides to leave, and he's like, well, forget all of you all. I'm going to go straight to the Pope in 1484. And he goes to Pope Innocent VIII. And he has a new law written up. He does all of his persuasion. He uses Exodus 22:18. He summons Aristotle and Plato and all of these other men to say, this is the next thing that we have to get rid of. It is in the way of us converting everyone to Christianity and getting everyone to heaven. So he has a new law that kind of takes away any of the bishop's power that was in those local counties, and it's called the Summus Desiderantes. And this is where he writes his most famous book, maybe some of you are familiar with it in a lot of witch history books, the Malleus Maleficarum. And this is where Heinrich writes the full definition of a witch. He talks about the powers of a witch. It's basically like the witch hunter's manual, right? It goes through the legal proceedings of witch hunts. So if you happen to find a witch in your neighborhood, in your town, here are the legal proceedings. And it completely overruled the local jurisdiction on witch trials, because at this time people were still doing witch trials, but it wasn't at the extent that we know it through history. It was like, oh, somebody was causing harm, or a midwife had a miscarriage with a delivery and they're like, oh, you caused that, you know, but a lot of that didn't really go through. But this really overruled all of those local jurisdictions and secular courts. It was like Inquisition time for the witches, and Heinrich was going to lead the way. And just to spite to the people in the small German town he was in, he puts on the first page this new law that he got from the Pope, being like, yep, you're overruled, and I have complete power over all of this, so you can't tell me to stop. This guy was something else. And his ideas too, in the Malleus Maleficarum, where women were more susceptible to the devil's temptations. We will say, though, that 80% of the actual witch trials were women, 20% were men. But there is a lot of talk of women and bias towards women in the Malleus Maleficarum. And the Malleus Maleficarum was the second most popular book, second to the Bible at this time, that was in circulation for over 300 years and translated in German, French, Italian, and English. So everyone's like, oh, this guy's got it. Like, we got to watch out for witches. So everyone's got this manual now of how to name a witch. And so just one little excerpt that I wanted to share with you all to feel the feels against Heinrich Kramer. I'll let you feel whatever you want to feel, but on the bottom here, what else is a woman but a foe to friendship, an inescapable punishment, a necessary evil, a temptation, a desirable calamity, a domestic danger, a delectable detriment, an evil of nature, painted with fair colors. That was his thoughts on women and the Malleus Maleficarum. So this was going on for 300 years. Talk about a spell book, right? Talking about our words and how influence they have. This was basically like a huge curse upon Europe that he put into words. So from 1484 to 1750, we only have recorded 200,000 witch trial deaths. And then this book had so much influence that as recently as 2005, there were 3,000 witches killed for their practice in Tanzania. That this is the influence that our words and books and things can have in this way. So moving into contemporary witchcraft and understanding that really, like, you know, dark history and how one person and that one woman spit on him and was just like, I'm gonna spite you, right? We get to our contemporary witches today. But before I get to contemporary witches, I would love to hear in the chat thoughts on the history. Did you know about some of these? Is this all new for you? How's it hitting you, right? Like knowing that this was the history of witches. Because when I found out these things on my own journey, I was like, how is this not talked about more? And how are we not, like when somebody mentions witch, it's actually a good thing that you were the healer of that community. You were the person that offered tools, interconnectedness, all the things that you all mentioned in your community, and that was immediately shut down. And how much wisdom, how many tools, how many herbs could have been shared that were lost because of that, right? Oh yes, Brianna. Yeah, Jen, great question. Is this essentially a way to make any dissenter be a witch? Absolutely. And actually, I'm glad that you brought that up, because quick little poll for you all. According to the Witch's Hammer, the other kind of translation for Malleus Maleficarum, the book here. Oop, here we go. We have, if you, according to Heinrich, if you were shape-shifting, if you had sex with the devil, if you were an older woman, if you were an unmarried woman, if you were without family, if you were ill-tempered, combative, or you were just a little too smart, or you were wittier than your neighbors, you may have been a witch. So if you were a dissenter, you bet your booty that you were a witch, that they could use it against you, for sure. Let's see here. The grand rise of the patriarchy. This is the foundation of lots of things that are now crumbling. Yeah, right? Absolutely. Raquel, the history of witches is a perfect example of the evil of patriarchy. Absolutely. The Bible, as I understand it, has been the best-selling book since it was written and compiled. That has never changed. So it is wild to consider the impact of the Bible, plus that heinous anti-female manifesto. Absolutely, that's pretty much what it was, right? Circulating as bestsellers at the same time, right? And that's the other crazy thing, too, of the mistranslation of poisoners versus witches. It's like, okay, kill the poisoner or put him on trial, you know? But yeah, that one little Bible verse. How dare women have the ability to heal communities? Patriarchy must make this evil, wrong, and demonic. Yes. Jen, I would have been so screwed. Yeah. Right? Yeah, everyone's like, same. Everyone being helpers in the community. How dare you, witches? How dare you all, baby witches? Yeah, saddened by the loss of knowledge and healing. It also brings to mind the history of women being committed to mental institutions for non-compliance with the conventions of society. Absolutely. And that again, right? It's this, the influence of that one piece of literature having all the way up to 2005 with witches, but how that also can influence women and how we are today to a couple hundred years ago, voting, all these different things, right? And then Sarah, oh yeah, Malleus Toxicus Masculinity. I love that. That is so great. Was sex with the devil considered eco-sex? Right? Interesting perspective on that, because it definitely could be. If it is at all ecosexuality, it's under the umbrella of pagan, which at the time, right, with the Inquisition, they were like, no pagans allowed, no earth worship. Sex with the devil, so sex for pleasure. Yeah, that too. You're like, what? You're making noises of pleasure? What? Not allowed. Well, this is the other crazy thing. So the sex with the devil, this guy, Heinrich, basically, if you read, and I highly recommend you all check it out. It should be online for free, right? The Malleus book. He goes into a lot of detail on sex with the devil. He goes into, it's a lot of smut, honestly, about these, like what witches are doing with things. And I'm like, this guy was sexually repressed. So there's a little bit of that happening as he's writing the book, because that was the other thing too, remember, with the first trial with our awesome lady, where he's automatically questioning her sexuality and things. And the bishop's like, dude, this has nothing to do with what we're talking about. Like, how is that proving she's a witch? You don't know what's going on in her bed. So there was definitely, and at that time too, there was still a lot of taboo around sexuality. So this just amplified it even more, right? Very kill the savage, save the woman, ecosexual, sex with nature's elements. Oh, yeah. And if you were to do that, right, it would be considered pagan. I found it interesting that the bishop thought her sex life was outside of the trial. Yeah, right? When would that start to be considered part of it? He's a very interesting person, Heinrich. Even if that Bible verse did not exist, I'm still not confident that these same or very similar patterns would have come to be. That's a really good point, though, too, right? There would have still been other ways, because if we're thinking about what his other intent was of how can the Catholic Church have as much control over the towns and the villages, he knew that the women of the town would share news. They were the community builders, they were the community healers, they had influence that men didn't in their towns. They would have found a way that would have said they're still witches, or who knows what they would have said, right? So I'm glad that you brought that up, Courtney. So now that you all know about, what was that? That was such a great, Malleus Toxicus Masculinae. Now that you all know about it. Yes. Oh yeah, totally, Christine, bye. Now that you all know about it, highly recommend if you want to dive into that and just see the extent of how that book really catalyzed a lot of how witches are looked at, even in popular culture too, of like, oh, it's an insult, or like spooky unknown things. That's where a lot of it is coming from. It's a big PR smear campaign against women and healers. So contemporary witches, though, knowing that history, we see now recently mainstream articles about witches. There's recently one, I think it maybe have been last year, in the New Yorker that had a photography exposition on various women that are practitioners in their communities and how they identify as witches. We also have the actual activist group Witches, and you'll see them here, Witches Against White Supremacy, and they come in full garb, wearing all black, wearing their hats, and they're a big activist group. And we're seeing right now in a lot of contemporary witchy spaces that there is very much an intersection between these, by acknowledging and looking back at the history of this big genocide, basically, of these healers and people that were community builders. We're taking it back into the present and going back to what was the wisdom that was forgotten, or going back to grandmothers, going back to ancestors, like you brought up, all of you, about connecting with ancestors. What was the wisdom that they had that maybe was forgotten or not acknowledged, right? We also see it in a lot of books here. I have Sarah Lyon's Revolutionary Witchcraft, A Guide to Magical Activism, which is a great read for those of you that are feeling inspired with the history of witches now, to bring it into your activism practice. And that can be a magical part of your path, right? Activism is definitely a part of witchcraft. They were influencers in their communities, whether it was healers and helping out, you know, with educating or things like that. They were also, you know, leading different things in how we do midwifery at that time. Like, oh, here are the protocols for this. We also are seeing contemporary witches in fashion. I have here Laura Bowker, who her fashion company is called The Unseen, and she uses fabric that she makes together that is inspired by the elements that change color based on the temperature. So we see more red, more blue, more inspired by the elements, and all four elements, making the unseen seen, as some of you mentioned at the beginning, as a big responsibility for some of these witches that they take on, right? Then we also have the Hood Witch, bringing tarot and bringing digital perspectives to witchcraft, making it more mainstream, and also bringing art to it and seeing installations as ritual, which I really love. And she's making it more accessible through our digital technologies to create witchy communities online and offline. And of course, Harry Potter, I can't not. But Harry Potter opened up the doors for, you know, looking at a lot of different myth and lore and elements and magic in various different ways, that opened up a whole kind of curiosity for people to look into the history of witches, that could possibly be adding to this resurgence of curiosity in baby witchery, in solitary practices, as we're moving to a more like secular society, or feeling, a couple of you mentioned, growing up in certain backgrounds, being like, oh, well, this witchcraft definitely has a connotation, or there's some kind of guilt around that, or there's some scariness with it. It's offering a little kind of resurgence into, wait, there can be secular type of witchcraft, and using it for support in mental health, support in self-care, support in community. And I wanted to share this here too, just to kind of give a bigger overall perspective of this new contemporary witch that is present here. We have the modern day witch, who is the archetype of a non-conforming woman who rebels, questions patriarchal dogmas, draws on her own wisdom, and fights for her rights. Witchy heroines include not only urban witches and village healers, but also activists, artists, psychologists, actresses, and other women who refuse to listen when they are told to be quiet. And I do want to also say too that it's not just women, it's people from all on the spectrum. And if anything, I have more queer witches that I work with that are non-binary that have such a perspective to share, that they all are taking on different hats of psychologists, artists, actors, activists, educators, and they're all doing their own witchery in their own way through community. So with that, I wanted to share some, for those of you too, because I have more of my background's Romanian, as Kelsey mentioned. For sure, Brianna. There is so much, lots of different, right? We're talking about hereditary witches, but also there's so many paths in witchcraft. And I wanted to share just a couple here too. And my background is Romanian, it's Eastern European, more Slavic kind of magic. But I have friends from all over that practice all different kinds of ways as they connect with their ancestors and their lineages. We have brujeria in Mexico and parts of South America, strega in Italy, regitoria in Romania, hoodoo, which is more of an African, Native American, and Euro-influenced practice. So all kind of put together. Think of when you're getting to New Orleans, Louisiana, we get all those different influences kind of put together and borrowing from each other. And we have voodoo in Haiti, and then West African voodoo from the, and I don't know how to pronounce, and I won't butcher, a smaller ethnic group in Africa. So there are various different subsections of very similar practices, but they all have their own flavor. I think some of you mentioned that, all different tribes and groups may have their own kind of practices, which is very, very true. Then we have Santeria, which is from the African diaspora, primarily in Cuba, where it's originated from the Australian Aborigines tradition. So these are just a few of the various magical traditions that come from all over that I've had connection with, or that I've worked with practitioners on. And a lot of these folks, their big job is really connecting in with their ancestors and marking down what were these traditions that grandma did, what were these little sayings that mom did or that dad did or my cousin did, and this one, all these kinds of things. So they're documenting this history that otherwise probably wouldn't be available, since we know what happened with the witches in the past. So yeah, I wonder if you are a witch according to Heinrich Kramer. These are the questions and the things that he mentioned, just a few of them. There's a whole long list of the various powers of witches and what may deem you a witch at that time. So knowing the history now of witches and knowing kind of the various iterations of witches from a more Western European perspective and the ancient kind of history perspective, how would you define a witch now? From how you did at the beginning to now, how would you define a witch moving forward after BabyWitch class today, with kind of this more bigger macro overview of what witches had to go through, honestly, right? And if they survived it. Badasses, yes. Apparatits, honestly. Yes, that is great. I love it. All right, I did want to give some fun facts too, as those definitions come in the chat about witches' brooms and witches' hats, right? Like we had Halloween yesterday. I saw a couple witches while I was in the neighborhood going trick-or-treating. Ooh, anyone who doesn't silently fall into line. Yes. Right. Yes. So I want to talk a little bit about just some of the origin stories of these as well. So we have the witch's broom, which we know, and I love witch's brooms for ritual. And primarily they were called besoms at the time, and they were used for hedge witchery. And maybe some of you have heard of flying ointments thrown around in witch history workshops or books or things like that. So what women would do, some women and also other folks too, when they would meet to share advice of, hey, here's a protocol for this, or here's this herb for this, or they were engaging in different old pagan practices, they would take their besom, their broom that they made, and it was just like you see in the back there, just like a little broom, but it was some sticks. Sometimes it was herbs. Sometimes they would make them small. Imagine like a little bundle of herbs, and they put a little stick in that, and they would use that sometimes too and just go around. And they would use this ointment, and it was a couple different herbs that they put together that would actually be a hallucinogenic. So instead of, like, we'll say the modern kind of Western appropriated view of it would be an ayahuasca ceremony, but for these witches, they would be on their brooms, and then they would like astral project. They would have these visions. They would jump over hedges. They would have hedge witches, and they would feel like they were flying even though they weren't. So this is where we get some of the flying witch type of ideas from, and it was from smaller pagan groups that were using brooms in this way during rituals. Yes. Oh, deeply connected erotic beings, trauma survivors. Yes. Yes. All these. I love these coming in. But for modern day and like after witch and kind of contemporary witch practices, really what you can use brooms for, and you can make them your own, or you can, use a regular broom too from the dollar store. You don't need anything fancy. Is using the broom to sweep away spirits, especially during different kind of spiritual sabbats or holy days for witches, or even if you're just feeling like there's something heavy hanging out in your space, using the broom to sweep away the energy. And it's not literal sweeping like on the floor, it's just sweeping away the energy and doing that ritual to sweep it away. And so that's one little ritual, one little tool here. Raquel, I heard a lot of witches brewed beer and would put a broom outside of their shop to say beer was available. Don't know if there's truth to that. I heard that it's been floating around, that story. And I don't know 100% how true it is, but I really like it. I think it's like, yes, like the beer is ready and brewing, and like selling beer too. And then there are two theories for the witch's hat, about actually in different groups, especially ethnic minority groups that weren't part of the main part of the village or the town, primarily in Germany at the time, France, part of Italy too. Different ethnic groups were told to wear certain hats, right? Okay, we'll unpack that later. But at that time, there were these anti-Semitic hats that were worn by Jews in the 1400s that had more of a top view. And then if women were caught in a relationship with somebody like that, it was shameful to do that. So there was already shame associated with that. And so they already put that on the hat, put that into the witch's brew of this whole, right, book against witches, that there was already a connotation of negativity around it. So they used that pointed hat, or just like a taller brimmed hat for that. The other theory for the witch's hat too, that doesn't have as much support, but is still pretty agreed upon, was the Quakers origin of the hat. And the Quakers were just a subgroup of Christians that were popularized more in colonial times, that there was one Quaker leader that went inside a church and decided to not take off his hat. And they also had kind of those, you know, if you see any old pilgrim illustrations, visuals, things like that, you'll see that it's a black hat with a little bit of a brim. It's not like a pointy one, but anything like that. But he decided that he did not want to take off his hat in church. And he's like, you cannot make me. And that was already heathenry. That was already a bad thing. So with that story kind of went around colonial times. And there was this idea of, oh, well, if you are wearing a black hat, that's not good. And you're not a follower of, you know, the church, and you're against, you know, all of the customs and things that are. And so from there, if there was literature or letters being sent between Europe and North America, we started seeing that illustration of the witch with the black hat being popularized from colonial times. Yes, and there are still Quakers. Let's see. Let me catch up with all you all. Okay, here. Makes me think of alewives. Yes, essentially community herbalists who kept the village healthy. Absolutely, Ray. Yes. I feel like witches would definitely be brewers. Yes. I find it interesting that there's a connection between a domestic tool, a broom, and witches. Now, traditionally, women were expected to take care of cleaning. Oh, yeah. It's a direct connection with that, too. And then Quakers still exist. There's a Quaker school on Thorndale in Chicago. They're lovely and also call themselves Friends. Yes. There's also from the Quakers, but then they went on their own separate way, was for those of you interested in more for the queer history of magical people, the universal friend that they call themselves. They had a near-death experience and they came back. They were kind of taken out of the Quaker group, but they called themselves the universal friend. And that's a whole other history and interesting story in itself. They were a very magical human being. So those are two, like those origins, right, of witches' brooms and witches' hats. So you all know about that. Oh, did somebody speak? Did I miss something? Oh no, we're good. Okay. Here we go. So I was going to mention, right, we have a full buffet of tools that you can add to your toolkit as a baby witch, as a practicing witch. And so we have here astrology, divination, herbalism, spell work, inner alchemy, shadow work, exorcism, having a coven, casting circles, crystal and gem healing, astral projection, channeling, using cosmic cycles, which a couple of you mentioned, psychic sensitivities, seasons, flowers, mediumship, all these different things. So I want you all, like I mentioned at the beginning, there's an intuitive nudge to a couple of these things. Write down 1 to 3 of some of these things that you want to explore, you want to add to your baby witch practice. And if you'd like to share in the chat, you totally can, but you don't have to. You can keep your practice solitary if you want. Today's like a pop-up coven. Yeah, feel free, Julie. Which ones? Yes, great question. So sigils, elements, and runes. So sigils are, if you want to set an intention, and you'll put it in the affirmative, and we'll go over that in spells, you would take out all of the vowels. So let's say health, for example. So I'm going to take out the E and A of this, right? And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the H and I'll put L, T, H. Let's do that. And I turn it into a symbol, right? And that means for me health. And that's a sigil. That's like sigil making very simply, that you don't have to journal everything out, right? Like I want health or da 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 da. You can put this on the bottom of your shoe from walking around. You can put it in a little amulet. You can put it in a notebook, in your shadow book, in your whatever it is, in your phone as a wallpaper, right? As a little reminder, instead of like, oh, this is health. Sigils kind of are like code words for witches. And elements, I consider myself more of an elemental witch. So I use fire, earth, air, and water. Folks that are in my coven know about that too, of like fire. And if you're doing tarot too, or into astrology, a lot of this overlaps. You'll see there's different correspondences to different elements. Like I'm a Sagittarius and that's a fire element. But if I want more creativity, maybe I want to call in fire. If I need to be more in touch with my emotions, I want to call in water. That's like more elemental type of stuff. And then runes are a specific type of sigil that has a really long history, more from the Celtic tradition, but a lot of people like to use runes in their magical practice. So they're like already established sigils, and then you're working with those. Great question. Herbalism, ancestral connection, spell work. Oh, same as Kelsey. You and Marissa. Definitely deity exploration within the practice of Ifa. Yes. Channeling and astral projection. Love that. Jennifer, astral projection, psychic sensitivities, and the elements. Yep. Crystal and gem healing, herbalism, ancestral connection. Ooh, these are all good. Right? And this is plenty of stuff to play with and explore. These are the nudges that you want to listen to, right? As a witch, you're really tuning into the nudges of that is what's piquing my curiosity. That is what I want to bring in more on the regular for my practice and my personal spiritual growth. Oh, inner alchemy. Think Jungian psychology, Jen. Jung was a very big fan, and he called it inner alchemy of, and there's some overlap too between shadow work and inner alchemy, like what needs to be transformed, whether it's a belief system or anything like that. Yeah. Oh, perfect. Sarah and Hannah, what is scrying? So scrying is looking into reflective bodies. It could be water, it could be mirrors, it can be what else? A crystal ball, even, where you're looking in and you're open to whatever arises for you. So it's like a meditative, contemplative practice, but you're just allowing whatever arises within that reflective space to speak to you, right? Herbalism, astrology, seasons, flowers, sigils, elements, tarot, and oracle. Yup. We got cosmic, green, ancestral, elemental witches happening in Baby Witch class. We'll do another minute or so on the page, and then I'll move over to our fun workshopy part. Are there more animal tools? Yes. And there are a couple of folks too in tarot class that use animal oracle cards. There's also animal totem work. There are, depending on different traditions that you're a part of too, and ancestrally, if there is, right, like a crest or a totem that is a part of your lineage. Yeah. We have herbalism, crystal and gem healing, and tarot. Yes. Mediumship, deity exploration, and channeling. Ooh, seeing a lot of air elements, air and earth elements in the space. Casting circles, great question. We're gonna get into that right now. So, all right. Oops, let me go back here. So rituals, we've talked about rituals and kind of sustaining them, right? I want to make sure I see all your faces, but I also see the screen. Okay, here we go. So thinking of rituals as you consecrating your space, you deciding that this set of time or this day is where you're going to do your practice, whether it was going to, Shabbat, or you going to church, or going to communion, or maybe there wasn't a practice like that on the regular. Deciding that whether it's one day a week or an evening before bed, that this is your time for your rituals. And with rituals too, there's community and there's solitary rituals. I have a couple here. I have from putting, as you're stirring your tea, making a sigil in your tea can be a ritual. It's a very small one, but it's very intentional, right? Also have journaling with the lunar cycles. That's something that I've done over the years. With every time there was a full moon and a new moon, I would pull some cards, I would light a candle, and I would journal what needs to happen or what needs to unfold during those lunar cycles. Also have making altars. And there are a couple of folks that I work with that they have a couple different altars in their spaces based on, you know, the elements. Then there are people that have just one altar. There are people even that have a little portable in their pocket altar with their little witchy tools because they're traveling a lot. And there's baths too, like a ritual of a bath, the self-care type of overlap here that we see with witches. And we have community rituals. I have two pictures here from two Romanian folk rituals. One is like this bear festival that it happens at the end of the year that's bringing in the new year, and the bear is eating away all of the old spirits. So everyone's wearing these old bear costumes. And then the other one is sweeping away the devil. So we have the devil with the big antlers, this really cool costume, and there's a huge parade that happens, right? So connecting with those different rituals for yourself, your ancestors, and seeing what did they do, being curious about that. And is there a way to honor that for yourself? So for me, whether it's, you know, I have a little piece of fabric that's a textile that reminds me of that ritual, I keep that on my altar as a reminder of like, oh yeah, ancestors are here, hello, can't forget. Keep them in that space. I have an external reminder for myself in my ritual of, okay, this is consecrated sacred space that I have made, right? It's kind of taking back that power as witches of, wait, I don't have to wait for the priest to consecrate something, or I don't have to wait for the rabbi to consecrate something. I have that power within me and deciding that that is true, right? So spell casting. Been talking a lot about words and books and influence. That is what spells are, right? And we saw that the Malleus Maleficarum was just one giant curse that had so much influence, right? Over so many years, even after death. And so spells really are words that you use with the intention, an emotional kind of invocation. There is a lot of emotion that gets put into a spell. And then you can create your own spells. They can be poetry. They can be a single word, like I just made this health sigil. But if I'm connecting emotionally with already healthy, or what does health look like for me personally versus what society says health is, right? Like, what does that look like for me? I connect in with that. And if it's an invocation, a mantra, I know many of you, mantras, those are spells. Those are already words that are being affirmed. And it's connecting emotionally to them. And if there are words that during a mantra or during an affirmation just don't sit well with you, change up those words. Your spells are very personal to you. And you can write that in your book of shadows, which we will get to, to see and test out, this is a spell that worked for me. This is a spell that didn't work for me. Because there's going to be a lot, right? So I have here a little poem that was created, a little fun one here. Maybe a poem that's really fun can work for you as a spell because it creates an emotional connection, a reminder for you. For others, I have the little Slavic Witchcraft book there by Natasha Helvin, that she has spells that were already put together by old Slavic witches and things you should do and not do, right? So I'm like, okay, let me try it out. If it resonates, cool. If it's not, I'll cross it out in my book of shadows. Like, this didn't really work for me, or this really created an emotional reaction in me. And paying attention to those nudges of things. So with spells too, we talked about sigils. And you'll see here, there are a couple different symbols that I have. So we'll have this Pentagram is one, and those are the elements, again, connecting to spirit, water, fire, earth, and air. I also have different Romanian blouses that I have that have a variety of different sigils, and a lot of different groups have these kinds of blouses that each symbol is a different meaning, has a different story attached to it. So I'll sometimes wear those with a certain intention behind them. For others, you can make a pendant with that sigil, with that poem, with that spell inside of it, right? So don't feel like you have to limit. It's this iambic pentameter with this many sentences allowed, with anything like that, right? If there's a piece of art or some writing that really resonates, that creates an emotional stirring within you towards something that you want to manifest, towards a sensation or a quality that you desire or that you want to bring more of in your life, that's a spell for you. That's causing a stirring within you. And you want to listen to that and add it to your book of shadows, because what one poem or one spell may do for me may not work for somebody else, right? Everyone's affected differently to the different spells. So somebody was asking about casting circles. So boundaries, right? We're not opening up any demon portals. So casting your circle, what that really means is, right, we're talking about your ritual, consecrating your space, and it can be a circle, it can be a triangle, it can be a hexagon, pentagram, whatever you want, doesn't matter. It's just this actual energetic boundary that you are visualizing around yourself, that it's actually a part of you casting this spell, that you are in this certain space, in this circle, right? So setting your boundaries. And how do you feel when you are within your boundaries? Do you feel safe? Do you feel empowered? Do you feel grounded? What needs to happen for you as you're casting your circle to lean into that feeling, right? So then connect with the feeling of what you want manifested, healed, what you want to expand more, right? And this could even be a gratitude thing of, wait, I'm feeling really good right now. I want to cast a circle to really sit in the gratitude of this, right? There was something growing up where all the time I would hear about prayer being used, and it was like God was Santa Claus. And I'm just like, God's not Santa Claus. Can't ask for this and this, right? It's more of a feeling thing with spells. Spells and prayers can also be used interchangeably in that way. So feel into calling it into the present. So even if you have, you want to get more of that gratitude in, or we're talking about health, want to feel more of that health in, feel into it, into the present, knowing that it's already done. That's always a really powerful phrase, a powerful spell that I use. Like, it is already done. It is already complete. And it's like a switch that happens in my body for me of just, oh, okay, I'm leaning into that right now, right? Then we release the outcome and trust that the highest good outcome will unfold, right? Sometimes we want one thing and then it didn't show up, or something else showed up instead of it, and being like, know that the highest good is going to come from it, right? When you cast that spell. And then listen to intuition on what will cast this spell. So if there is, right, if you're speaking these words internally, if you're journaling, if you're at your altar, listen into your intuition of, do I need to create a sigil around this? Do I need to color? Do I need to look at my astrology and kind of plan some things? Listen into, you all mentioned 3 or 4 different tools from the buffet of which tools that you can use. Listen in to see if there is any aligned or inspired action that may come from you staying in your cast circle, casting the spell, connecting with this desire. And then the final part is to take inspired intuitive action. So whether it's, okay, I want to do this thing on this next full moon, I just got to look up when the next full moon is and I put it in my book of shadows, or I put it on my calendar. Or there's something about, oh wait, there's a yoga class that I've been wanting to take because my intention is health. What do I got to do to take a yoga class? Or I've been wanting to connect with my ancestors. Oh, this sigil is just kind of coming in my mind, or this color is coming into my mind. Maybe I'll wear more of this color, right? Looking in your closet and saying, I need to wear more blue to call in grandma. Whatever it may be, being open to that. So safety first. I mentioned this. No demon portals when engaging in spell work. When casting circles for yourself, it's important to sweep away any negative energies, right? To not bring, if there's like stress from the workday, judgment, resentment, heaviness, or anything like that towards others, for that time that you're in your circle, to just cast that boundary and be like, okay, I am here in this space just right now for this moment. And it can just be like a millisecond where you're casting the circle, be like a breath. You're like, I have cast my circle and now I'm in this different headspace, in this different body space. And then tuning into what is it that you need so that you don't bring in any of that energy that you don't want in that like sluggishness. You know, for me, when manifesting things, I was like, oh, a new kind of project that I wanted, but I was in a certain headspace that wasn't the best. And I didn't really follow my own advice and cast the best circle. And so I manifested something, but it came with that same frenetic energy that I brought to my circle. And I was like, darn it. I manifested, but I didn't want it with this kind of energy. So keeping that in mind, it's kind of a lot of energy maintenance for witches is casting circles. And then speak in the affirmative with the things in your space, in your circle. Not using I want, I need, or I hope, just saying it is already done, it is already complete, right? Being like, I have, I embody, speaking in the affirmative of that in that circle. And this doesn't mean that we want to bypass those negative emotions because we want to acknowledge them, right? Because that's just going to cause a whole other stuff. Oh, great question, Janine. What if you're really depressed and you're casting the circle to ask for healing? How to not be depressed in that moment? Great question, right? And if we're in the headspace, we're in the body space of something really heavy, we want to make space for that. And also, big thing with it is just self-awareness, right? When I was manifesting in that frenetic, anxious headspace, I wasn't really aware of it. I was just like casually casting circle. That you already have awareness that I'm just in the depressed kind of low space right now. I'm like, all right, low space, you're allowed in the circle with me, and I'm bringing my self-awareness in that this is what I want. So there's a distinction, right? Or discernment. Somebody brought up discernment at the beginning. You're bringing that with you, right? Because sometimes there's some emotions we just can't cast off. It's like you're hanging on with me for a while right now, right? And especially in Chicago now with the winter's coming, it's like, oh, here we go, need all that vitamin D. We want to make sure that we're not bypassing those emotions. We're bringing them in, and we're bringing self-awareness on top of those, and we're bringing in whatever we want to manifest. Naming demons is sometimes all it takes to cast them out. Yeah. Yeah, it's true. It's true. And it can be too, like if it's something that's been hanging out in your space for a while, like shadow people or things like that, you may want to do, listen in again to your intuition of, hey, do I want to create a sigil? Do I want to do something on a full moon? Do I got to wear a certain thing? Or, listening into your intuition on those things is going to be best, because you'll know if that heavy energy is still in your space or not. Great questions. Very great questions here. Any questions on casting spells or circles in the chat or otherwise? Ray, I am a full witch. Yep, this is wild. Oh, great. Okay, what are thoughts on consent and witchcraft? Yes, that is a huge thing. And I'm a big fan of consent for everything, especially with hypnosis. I'm like, you got to give me consent to mess with your subconscious. And there's got to be rapport there and trust. Otherwise, it's just not, who knows what else could happen. So with that, I would always, if you are doing something for a friend or for a family member, letting them know, right? Because some people may be comfortable with it or uncomfortable with it. maybe they don't know the full history and the connotations and definitions of witches, so they still have that old idea and scary idea of what witches do, right? But if you share with them and say, hey, you know, I'm gonna, you know, light a candle for you, or I am doing some, you know, some spell work, some magic work for folks, like if there's anything I can do, and if you're comfortable with it, I'll add you to my list of people that I'm casting spells for, right? So always ask for consent with people with witchcraft. It's just like, I could put it to the same thing of, there's this thing of, oh, I'll pray for you. You know, there's a certain kind of connotation when it comes to like, oh, poor you, you know, I'll pray for you. There's the same thing that can happen for spells and witchcraft too. So great question with that. Oh, what are shadow people? Oh, that's a whole, it's a whole class for another day maybe. But shadow people, if ever you feel like a heavy energy in your space, or if out of the corner of your eye there's like some shadowy type of figure or energies that might be in your space, those are shadow people. Lore, which is a great podcast, but they're also on YouTube. If you want to do more research on shadow people, they are, it's a really interesting phenomenon that happens both like in folklore, but also just like in psych spaces too. Kind of like a Slender Man type of energy, creepiness, spookiness that's there. I had to deal with a couple shadow people in my space, so yeah. But don't look up Google images, just don't, because if you're sensitive, it'll maybe make you scared, so don't do that. Let's see here. Can we share these slides when we send? Oh, yes, yes. Oh, only practice on things that affect you. Oh, you can totally support other people, right? Like community witchcraft is totally a thing. We're just asking for consent from people. Be like, hey, is it okay if I light a candle for you, or if I do a sigil for you? Most of the time, people won't know what that means. Like, what? What's a sigil? Are you gonna hex me or curse me? You know. So it's a lot of like some education that might be happening as witches for folks, right? Demystifying what a witch is. Great questions, all. Courtney, I like the idea of trusting your intuition when creating, but I wish I had more structural ancestral guidance to work within, mourning the loss of knowledge. There may be in that process of mourning space for ancestral things to come in. As a couple of folks mentioned, channeling and kind of opening up and astral projecting. Allowing space for that mourning may bring up some insights and intuitive things for you, since that ancestral connection isn't direct right now. I feel like the idea that certain things will or will not resonate with me is really good, but wondering if sometimes certain rituals take time and guidance from experts to be able to feel. Great question. That is, if you're looking for more structure and things, I would recommend, where's that book? The Slavic Witchcraft book by Natasha Helvin. Also being in a coven with a practitioner, that you resonate with their rituals, right? Because there are some traditional kind of pagan, more Wiccan type of rituals that are kind of more mainstream. Like Casting Circle is definitely coming more from a Wiccan perspective, which I'm not, but I love the idea of it. And also Casting Circle is also a Slavic thing. So definitely listen into the intuition, lean into and allow the mourning to happen. And covens are a really good resource for that. And there are covens both online and offline, and folks that, you know, you may resonate with, if you're wanting some direct, like, here's the proper ritual for this. But I would always, I'm a big fan of allowing your autonomy and your autonomous intuition to be present, right? For sure. Let's see. Oh yeah. Oh, thank you, Kelsey. Yes, some really good content and workshops for connecting with ancestral knowledge. And they have different workshops for people of Euro descent and African descent. Absolutely. and check those out, because ancestral work is really magical when made space for. The big thing for me that's coming up for you, Courtney, is the mourning. Because in the mourning, in these really strong emotions, sometimes can be the gift that the ancestors maybe weren't even seen before, right? And the mourning is the validation of the ancestors. All right, all. Wanted to give you some little potion making ideas here for those of you that were interested in herbalism and making your potions. And I want to give you some 3 simple ones, but also give you some resources, because herbalism in itself can be a whole, you know, we've done whole classes on just herbalism, but we have for potion making can be kitchen witchery. It can be put in the food that you already bake with the intentions, right, with the spells that you put in them. But it also can be carried on your person. Like for protection, you can use clove, black pepper, turmeric, and ginger all together, or just one. For love, you can use rose, chamomile, and holy basil. And for manifesting, you can use marigold, sunflower seed, and salt, right? So you can get a little bag and keep it on your person, or you can add it with the intention, right, into your food and know, oh, this is manifesting bread that I'm baking, or this is love bread that I'm baking, or a love cookie. And that counts, right? Or you can even make with potions, a lot of the times they're teas or herbal infusions. And with herbalism too, there are 3 primary, or like there's lots of subgroups too for herbalism, but for different traditions, there's Ayurveda, which a lot of the yoga community will know about, traditional Chinese medicine, so more acupuncture and Chinese herbs, and then elemental herbalism, which is more Eastern European herbalism, which is what I practice. And when we're talking about magical potion making and herbalism for care, there are some different correspondences for things. So for example, like if somebody came to me and they said, I wanted some herbs for protection, what do you recommend? And I was working as a clinical herbalist, which I did, and I say, well, like, are you, you're going to drink this as a tea, but are you taking any other medication? I would not give them black pepper, because it can interact with the medication. So knowing these kinds of things, if that's something that is of interest to you, I highly recommend the American Herbalists Guild for looking to study herbs for those kind of more phytochemical interactions to keep yourself and your community safe as practitioners, if that's something that you want to integrate in your witchy practice. But also, like I mentioned, that kitchen witchery can include potion making or adding herbs and spices to add magic to food and drinks. And if too, you're wanting to do more like Chinese medicine or Ayurvedic practicing, that's going to be a whole other kind of modality that you can study and bring into your practice. But the simplest potion making is teas and stirring in your sigils into your teas in that way. And another really good reference too is Rosemary Gladstar's Medicinal Herbs, that talks a little bit about both the correspondences magically and also the medicinal holistic care that herbs can bring. So I know lots of you are going to want to deep dive after, because Baby Witch class is just 101. And there's so much that you all can take in. So I wanted to give you all a couple different books and podcasts and things. So stirring a sigil into tea, literally, let me see if I have I'll pretend this is a cup. So I have my health sigil. Yes, here we go, real tiny there. So I'm gonna take my spoon, which will be my wand in this way. And you can have a specific spoon that you're like, this is my magic witch spoon that I use, right? That is specific, and that can be a part of your ritual. For me, I'm just like, I'm on the go, a witch on the go, and I gotta make this happen, right? So no two ways are wrong. So I would just put that sigil in, and I would just stir it. And I would do it again, and I would stir it, and I do it like 3 times just so that it's real solid in there, and be like, oh, the intention of health is here in this cup. And I'm just really leaning into that feeling, right? Casting circle, breathing in, breathing out, putting in the actual sigil, stirring, and then mindfully sipping my tea. Great question. Off topic, so this question can wait. I don't know anything about tarot and feel called ever since I had a friend read some cards for me. How do I know what deck to buy and how to interpret the cards? Again, intuitive nudge. And also we have the intro to beginner tarot at Inner Sense starting next week. Right, Kelsey? Next week? Yeah. And we have, I teach Exploring Tarot on Wednesday night, so feel free to join in. It's fine even if you're a beginner. I was very hesitant to get the Rider-Waite-Smith deck because I was like, oh, I want an oracle deck. So I started with oracle decks because I love the artwork of them. And it's very much an intuitive choice. So this is what's drawing me in. So you want to listen to that. But if you're wanting to learn about like the foundations and the history of tarot, the Rider-Waite-Smith deck is the deck to start with. And actually, after learning about the history of the Rider-Waite-Smith deck personally, I was like, oh, yeah, I totally want this deck because it has so much symbolism and so much information in there. Let's see. Oh, yeah. Yes, tarot class on Wednesdays is fab. Wednesday nights at Inner Sense are just great in general. We have lucid dreaming and then restorative yoga. It's like the midweek self-care night. Great question though, Janine. Okay, so I wanted to share just a couple here. We have the Waking the Witch podcast, Slavic witchcraft. For those of you interested in more of the kind of casting circle, the power of words, and also kind of shamans in different cultures, Suggestible You by Eric Vance is fantastic. Biased because a lot of it is hypnosis. Mallory Hasty, who's a part of Inner Sense, she has the Horoscope Witch podcast, which is fabulous. Gabriella Herstick has a fabulous grimoire, which I will explain what it is in the next slide, called Craft. For those of you interested in a little bit more of the magical manifesting and the emotional side of spellcraft, Pop Magic by Alex Kazemi, Sean Robbins' The Good Witch's Guide has got some good little recipes and things. And then for those of you interested in more of the history, because I gave you guys a really quick witchy history, Kristen Soley's book and also Pam Grossman's Waking the Witch, they are both really great witch history books that'll go from the time that I talked about all the way to contemporary witches. Oh yes, let me type them in the chat for you. The Rider-Waite-Smith. And the other one was just listening to your intuition. Oracle or tarot card decks. And tarot cards have more of a history. Oracle cards are very much more artist-based on what they're creating. And the artist's own narrative and ideas of things. They might have some tarot overlap, but yeah. Oh, great question. Thoughts on buying decks yourself versus buying them as gifts? I think I've bought all of my decks except for one. I know that there's a whole thing about it's best to have it gifted to you from like another spiritual person or a witch. There are definitely some witchy lineages that are very strict about it. I'm not though. I'm like, it's a tool for my self-care and my intuition says to get it. This could be my Leo moon talking though, just being like, I'm gonna break the rules and I want to do it my way. And my Sag sun, so yeah. Ethereal Visions, Alana's deck's gorgeous. Yeah, we geek out about different decks on Wednesday night, so feel free to come in. So with that, we have about 15 more minutes to workshop on your Book of Shadows, which I'm really excited for you all to start, because you all got your 3 or even more things that you wanted to create, right? Or wanted to add to your witchy practice. So grimoires and books of shadows, maybe you've heard of these two terms interchangeably. Grimoires, all they are reference books and manuals with spells, moon cycles, witches' tools, and a how-to guide. So for example, the Good Witch's Guide and Gabby Herstick's Craft, which I mentioned previously, are like, they already have recipes that are done for you. They have spells that are already done for you, and it's a reference book. So grimoire can be a reference book in that way. Your Book of Shadows, which is actually it's a newer term, since we're seeing this revival of solitary witches come up in, like, if we're in the New York Times, we know we're going mainstream. It's basically a witch's journal of your personal path, your personal spells, your correspondences, and the lessons that you're learning with these different spells. So over the years, I've had all the way from like a small moleskin notebook to like a giant, documenting all the thing, giant sketchbook. So the size of it doesn't matter, as long as you know that you're going to engage with it. This is going to be what's going to be supportive for you documenting or witch's journey. And then with that too, got just a smaller one as well, like this. And that's where one of the big things that I wanted you all to come away with is your Book of Shadows is here to support you, to not let it be another thing on your to-do list, to not, like, oh, it's got to be perfect, or it's got to look like this medieval calligraphied, kind of big thing. It's got to be here to support you. And you can have your holy days. That's what sabbats are. And you'll see here this kind of wheel in the back. You'll see recently, maybe some of you got some happy Samhain messages. That's just a witch's Sabbath or holy day for the harvest time. And you can use, this kind of more Celtic influenced calendar for witches and pagans, or you can name, like solstices or your astrology or things like that for your own witch's calendar. But the big thing with it is it's your witch's journey journal, where you're going to see this spell worked, this spell didn't. I tried this kind of herbal mix. How did it work for me? How did it work for the community that I gave it to, right? So what we're going to do, and if you have a journal with you, awesome. If you don't, you can just grab a piece of paper and a pen, even a scrap piece of paper, and write down, give you like, let's see, how much time do we have? Like 2-3 minutes to write down what you would love to document in your Book of Shadows. And you have your 3 things, right, that you want to maybe explore or add to your witch's path. So connect in, you can write down like, okay, under herbalism, I want to learn about XYZ. Or for astrology, I want to get clear on my chart or learn how to read charts. What's one thing that you can do that would feel really fun for you on your spiritual witch path to engage with this week, this month, until the end of the year? This is already, we have 2 more months and then 2020 is over. What to sit with? So about a minute or so, wrap up thoughts, and feel free to, even after Baby Witch class, to kind of jot down these ideas, or you can already start your journal, right? I like jotting things down and just kind of planning them out before I put them into my journal, just so I can kind of track things as needed. But give yourselves that space to, with these nudges and curiosities. Alrighty. So as you're, yeah, it definitely starts like an intention. And you can even break up your book of shadows in like, okay, 5 pages for this intention, or you can keep it open, be like, let's just document this one intention right now, or this one page for that. You can choose the layout that will serve you, that will support you as you're exploring that intention and seeing it unfold. Great noticing, Ray. Sneaky, sneaky. So one thing to really make your book of shadows personal, and I found for me that it's been really helpful in my own personal growth and supporting me in not making myself feel wrong for the way that I am. And I think Kelsey can attest to this, as she's taught astrology at Inner Sense, that astrology can really give you a just affirmation of the nuance and the multiplicity that you are. Being like, this is who I am. And it's just, it's not an excuse, right, for some of the things, right, in our stars. We don't want to use astrology to bypass, but it does help to affirm parts of ourselves as strengths versus as looking at them as like, oh, I gotta soften myself, or I gotta dim my light. And they're like, no, you don't have to. This is who you are, and that's your gift, Sarah sharing, my current book of shadows is preface. This journal focuses on astrology, herbalism, movement, and inner healing. It acknowledges that shit is hard. Oh, I love that. It appreciates mistakes and successes alike and forgives for being abandoned. I hope someone finds that helpful. I think that's fantastic, Sarah. Thank you so much for sharing that. The acknowledgement of shit is hard. No bypassing in this book of shadows at all. So with why I brought up astrology as really just a personalizing your book of shadows is I use my astro rhythm. For those of you that maybe attended astrology a while ago, I did a class on your astro rhythm, but I have here on the screen my astro rhythm. I feel like I'm just like opening up like my secrets by giving you all my my chart. But I have a little 2-page spread in I used my bullet journal as my book of shadows in a way. And I have my chart in here, and then I have, the different symbols of my astrology. But then what I do for my astro rhythm, and why I'm very, very practical about this, is every planet has a correspondence with a day of the week. So we have Sunday being the sun, Monday being the moon, Tuesday being Mars, and I'll type this in the chat, Wednesday being Mercury, Thursday being Jupiter, Friday being Venus, and Saturn being Saturday. And knowing the elemental correspondence with these things, yes, I love that. The preface that Sarah shared. Having this has helped with, like, on these days I do rituals or I engage in a certain way. And that's helped to kind of give me a framework for my witch practice, for my rituals, for things in that way, honoring my own energy, my own rhythm. And I find that it's very helpful. And I find that adding my astro rhythm to my book of shadows is just a really fabulous reference for myself. If I ever forget and be like, oh, I'm setting up my month and I'm thinking, oh, well, why do I feel so tired on Thursday? Oh, my Jupiter's in Libra. Libra's all about balancing, and this first half of the week was this way, So it gives us more self-knowledge, and also compassion. Like, wait, this is who I am, and it's okay. So I'll type in the different correspondences here. Here we go. And you can get your free chart at cafeastrology.com. And then you get your little chart just like I have shared there. And then you can set up in your, you can even print it out if you want to and stick it into your Book of Shadows. You can do like your full chart if you like, whatever feels most supportive to you for your Book of Shadows. So you have it as a reference for yourself of, wait, this is my cosmic kind of little blueprint that I have available to me. Any questions on the Book of Shadows or your astro rhythm? Feel free to type in the chat before we go into our final Q&A. Great question, Ray. So grimoires can definitely be a reference for yourself, and Books of Shadows are more of like the personal. So if you were to print out your Book of Shadows, it would be more like, this is pertinent more to Ray, but you can include information in there that is like, oh, here are the full moons that are going to happen in 2021. That would be more like general audience, general knowledge for most people. And that would be more of a grimoire type of thing. Sure. Oh, and here's my little astro. But I wanted to give the option for final Q&A, so we will stop recording. And if you wanted to unmute yourself,